Our second example of rapid urbanization comes to us from the Arabian Peninsula in the city-state of Dubai. In 1966, Dubai, now part of the United Arab Emirates, struck oil in the Persian Gulf. And over the last 50 or so years, Dubai has invested its oil revenues not only in boosting its oil industry, but also providing a place for finance, for trade, for tourism, for real estate, and a playground for the world's rich and famous people. Now, the landscape of Dubai has grown rapidly since the year 2000. You can see in the background a modern city center that didn't exist in the 20th century. You could also see the growth of villas and the growth of low-rise buildings that are spreading out along these palm trees in the Palm Jumeirah. As we zoom in a little closer, again we see pretty lavish compounds in white. We see rather expensive villas in orange with the terracotta roofs. We see modern roadways, modern beaches. Dubai created coastlines, met the demand for international waterfront living, and it's doing so at an unprecedented rate. When we look around Dubai, we can see on the bottom left canals, artificial canals that take us through high-end shopping districts. We can see that modern city center at the top. And on the bottom right, we actually see an indoor ski slope. The oil revenues have generated so much economic strength that if you want to pay for it, you could find it in Dubai, including a ski slope found in the middle of an area that reaches 120 degrees. Dubai has seen its population explode as well. Again, oil was found in 1966. In 1968, the British withdrew. They no longer considered Dubai a protectorate. In 1970, the United Arab Emirates formed. Since that time, Dubai's population has exploded. You can see from 1968 to 1965, it's almost increased 100 times. And then, by 2016, we reached 2.5 million people. From 68,000 in 1968 to 2.5 million in 2016. And you may recall from population geography that Dubai has seen immigration contribute significantly to its population growth. And immigration here was many young men coming from the Middle East and South Asia to help build that city that we saw in the previous images. That city skyline doesn't happen overnight without an influx of labor. So Dubai today has this really odd-shaped population pyramid that reflects a significant part of its population is coming from other parts of the world. And that population is primarily young men going to Dubai to chase economic opportunity in building the city-state. Our next characteristic is what's called megacities. Megacities today are cities that are over 10 million. These are considered megacities. In 1900, we had no megacities. In 1950, we had two, Tokyo and London. Today, we have around 50. Concerns with megacities? Really, we're looking at this rapid growth. We're looking at a heavy environmental toll. Places like Lagos, Nigeria had 320,000 people in 1950, today over 10 million. So that type of growth, that type of unprecedented growth, has an incredible environmental strain on the surrounding area, especially in our emerging world, that these mega cities are not well equipped to handle that population growth. So when we're talking about mega cities, we're looking at 10 million or more people. We had none at 1900. We had two in the mid-20th century. And today we have around 50. Again, you can see the growth of these mega cities is happening in South Asia, East Asia, Latin America, as nearby as places like Mexico City. You can see the megacity population growth. Tokyo should remain on top through the middle of this century, but we see rapidly growing Delhi, Shanghai, Mumbai, Beijing, Dhaka, Karachi, Cairo, Lagos, Mexico City. The countries, or I'm sorry, the cities that follow Tokyo, all exist in emerging countries. Our next characteristic is what's referred to as metropolitanization. And metropolitanization looks at the increased connections between cities. As transportation improves, we could go from city to city faster than ever before. As our population spreads out, we're meeting people in between our cities. Think about the growth between Baltimore and Washington, Baltimore and Philadelphia, Philadelphia and New York. As our cities spread out, metropolitanization further links people, economic centers, different activities via new networks of transportation. As this metropolitanization takes off, we have what are called megalopolis. And these are massive city connections. In the U.S., we have the Northeast megalopolis, sometimes called Boswash, which runs from about Portland, Maine, down into almost Richmond, Virginia. And there's about 50 million people in this megalopolis area, in this massive metropolitan area. And economies are linked, populations are linked, transportation networks include all of these large, medium, and small cities through megalopolis. Halfway around the world, we have the Pearl River Delta megacity or megalopolis in China. This area has about 130 million people today. Now in 1979, Shenzhen, which has about 15 million people today, was a town of 30,000 people. The U.S. megalopolis area has grown since the 1700s, albeit slowly for much of that time. This Pearl River Delta megalopolis, it was initiated in 1979 when China designated this a special economic zone, inviting in foreign direct investment. So again, those cities like Shenzhen, which had 30,000 people in 1979, today have about 14 to 15 million people. And this network of cities that runs through the Pearl River Delta has upwards of 130 million people today, making it the largest megalopolis in the world. Our fourth characteristic is urban sprawl. And sprawl is a reflection of suburbanization. This image on the right of Charlotte, North Carolina shows you the growth outward from the city center. And you can see those areas in orange aren't all located within Charlotte's Beltway, which reflect, for the most part, the downtown area. They're reflecting the inner ring suburbs. And as we go farther from the city center, north on Interstate 77, south on Interstate 77, southeast on Route 74, we see that suburbanization is growing in those areas as well. Now, sprawl was mostly a more developed country issue in the mid-1900s. But over the last 20, 30 years, it's grown in our less developed or emerging countries. Those mega cities that we're seeing grow at unprecedented rates are also experiencing sprawl and suburbanization around the city centers. Our concerns with urban sprawl, again, is sustainability. Can we maintain this type of environmental change on a massive scale? Can we persist when we wipe out forests, farmlands, open space? There's been a great deal of attention paid to sprawl in the 21st century here in the United States. In other parts of the world, the negative effects of sprawl, the consequences, have not been as critically analyzed. So as we look around the world, we see mid-sized cities like Charlotte trying to plan for sprawl, trying to limit the negative effects. We see that here in Maryland. But when we go to a place like Lagos, when we go to a place like Dhaka, when we go to a place like Shenzhen, the controls in place are limited. The concern of sprawl doesn't take precedent when those countries, when those markets are trying to adopt that economic growth. And our fifth characteristic is slums. Slums are often considered locations of hope and despair. Slums attract people for economic opportunity. We could ask ourselves a few questions. What, why, and where do slums exist? Slums are informal housing. Informal housing means that these properties are built with scavenged materials, materials that are left behind, materials that aren't really safe relative to building standards we're accustomed to. So many times slums are built out of materials that are available. Individuals living in slums generally lack title. They don't own the land beneath their property, which means that at any time the city could come through and evict you from your residence. Sanitation is generally poor to terrible. Living in slums means that the government doesn't recognize your settlement, and they're not going to provide sanitation in most of our slums. These slums attract people, and they create high density situations where they're overcrowded. So you have density that is unforeseen here in the United States, common in slums around the world. The image here is of Kibera, and you could see the corrugated metal roofs rusted out. In the background, you could see the modern city skyline of Kenya. Kibera sits outside of the downtown area in what used to be a forest. Why slums exist is basically over-urbanization. Over-urbanization occurs when there's too many people arriving in a city for the job market to handle. Urbanization, rapid urbanization, reflects economic growth. But we also see that when too many people arrive, a government can't meet that population influx. The market can't meet that population influx. So what you have is a surplus of labor and a surplus population trying to make ends meet in the city. What we see grow here is an informal economy, an economy that falls out of the formal sector and originates based on need and meeting supply and demand both within the slum and, surprisingly, outside markets. Where we see these slums occurring are in our developing countries or our emerging countries. This image of Dharavi in Mumbai is the world's largest slum. It's estimated that about 1 million people live in this slum. And if you start to look around this image, you'll notice a few things. One, the building conditions are poor, they look relatively unsafe. But two, there's a lot of economic activity going on here. This isn't a site of total despair and lack of opportunity. You'll notice a lot of commercial vehicles winding through this slum. You'll notice at the bottom of the image, recycling. Recycling is a major economic activity found in slums. So while this is a place not of first choice, it is a place of hope. It is a place of opportunity when that opportunity falls out of formal avenues, when it falls out of the formal housing market, when it falls out of the formal job market. We see the slums pick up the pieces and provide opportunity. This potter in Dharavi, potters have been in Dharavi since the foundation of the slum. This potter creates pottery not only for those living in the slum, but also meets demand outside of the slum. You'll notice in this picture, a train is coming into Dharavi, meaning individuals are coming to work in Dharavi or leaving Dharavi. Also, goods are being shipped out by train, telling us that Dharavi, while a slum, is also playing a major economic role. And here you could see new looms that have been placed in Dharavi. So not stereotypical sweatshops, rather a place of work, a place of business. And within Dharavi, you have leather workers who provide for some of our major international retailers. Retailers that you might find on high-end streets in London, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles. So while Dharavi again meets the classification of a slum, its connection and importance to the outside world can't be overlooked. Dharavi has a $1 billion annual industry.